PSA, Lei Hang will not be here for this video unfortunately. He is currently tied up in unforeseen circumstances. So, without any further ado, let's hop into the video. Limbus company has been out for over 2 years now, and certain design decisions have changed or evolved over the course of its lifespan. I'll be showing y'all exactly how this deeply affects you, and why I'm deeply concerned about the future of our favorite game. But in order to see how our ecosystem has shifted, we're gonna have to go back, way back, straight to the beginning of the game's lifespan. That's right, I'm gonna be talking about Chapter 1. Welcome to the beginning. At the start of Limbus, the game was very far from what you'd call balanced. Identity balance seemed like it was all over the place. Keywords famously lacked count, and the coin system seemed to increase the divide between weak specialists and overtuned generalists. Enter the charge meta. Charge is a self-sustaining status that had no worry over potency in this section of the game's lifespan. Charge rolled high, did great damage, and fit very nicely into the random bullshit teams of this era, not to mention the countless ego synergies it had. Seeing as the current statuses aren't too well supported, Project Moon would attempt to develop numerous band-aid fixes to make them more viable, which did have some very unintended consequences. This is unfortunately a problem we'll see a lot as we explore further into the history of Limbus. The city isn't all doom and gloom though. Statuses would begin to obtain more support thanks to Update 4, and building a team around a particular status seemed to be more viable, especially with the normalization of the coin power conditional. This era would later be defined for the rise of unique and quirky identities, which each have win conditions we don't really see in the modern era. It's thanks to these identities and the power creep we obtained within status keywords that truly unique team structures were possible, and even viable, even if Charge was still king. Season 3 to me is where the modern era of Limbus truly begins. Coin values become very normalized, and many statuses that gained overwhelming amounts of support, now including a handful of team types that strictly benefit each other. I know N-Corp really came into their own with Update 4 in Season 2, but bear with me. Regarding those specific teams, that leads into one of the concerns I have regarding the future of Limbus, and I'll get into that after I explain implicit versus explicit design elements. Implicit design in gaming refers to the aspects within a game with uses that are player-defined. A great example of implicit design in Limbus is Season 3's seasonal identity, Captain Ishmael. Captain Ishmael, while working great with her other seasonal identities, relies on the mechanic of resonance to maximize her potential. Resonance is something that's possible with a lot of other identities in her, so it's up to the player to define uses for her kit. Explicit design, on the other hand, refers to aspects within a game with uses that are developer-defined. A great example of explicit design is within Blade Lineage Merceau, who explicitly benefits members of his own faction by being on the field. Explicit design, despite its limitations, has its own advantages. It allows for specific identities, which may not normally be used, to gain an advantage when put into the same team as another identity. Problems arise, however, considering how later identities use explicit design within their kits, so keep this in the back of your mind before we move on. Season 4 to me is the golden age when it comes to design and balance in Limbus. Tremor, previously the worst status in the game, gained the ability to change into different flavors, which greatly improved the damage of the archetype and its versatility. Sinking got some amazing support this season as well, with Echoes of the Manor supplying the team with a new way to increase count without heavily impacting team building. Our seasonal identity was a sinking ID, but rather than explicitly needing specific identities to function, he implicitly needs them, since his problem with count are counteracted by applying echoes to the enemy. Charge got even more this season. The new potency ID is finally adding long-term snowballing to the archetype. During this time, it's very hard to say which status keyword was the most viable. It was Charge. But an ugly beast of the meta would begin to rear its head for most of the keywords. This beast would simply be known as Walpurgisnacht. As I'm sure many of you are aware, Walpurgisnacht is the home of identities and egos which are both limited and pull-only. These identities and egos are not only meta-defining on release, but they usually give insight as to the future concepts Project Moon wants to explore. The identities I would like to talk about here might be obvious to some viewers. it's the full stop duo. Both of these identities heavily rely on each other in their kit, and due to the nature of Walpurgisnacht, on release, the only way to obtain these IDs is to pull for them. This is an example of explicit design being used in a way to create FOMO and thus increase revenue. Zero limit to Kim Ji-hoon's greed. Can his thirst for money be quenched? Can it be done? Greed aside, moving into Season 5, Project Moon bestows us with one of the greatest additions within Limbus Company, Unbreakable coins. The meta of Limbus, prior to the advent of Unbreakables, revolved pretty much solely around the ability to win clashes against the opponent. Unbreakables added the concept of the mixed success to Limbus, making taking, healing, and managing your resources a requirement rather than a consequence of bad gameplay. This, alongside the new chain battle archetype, makes clashing high less of an extreme priority, which further emphasizes team styles that stray away from the high-rolling generalist idea present since Season 1. Everything seemed to be going swimmingly for this season. Birds were singing, flowers were blooming, and there were a handful of new identities which radically changed the way you play a specific status, and cause you to interact with the implicit design of their gameplay. However, with the advent of this season's bad end identity, Manager Dawn, certain negative aspects of explicit design would become apparent. Manager Dawn has an empowered version of every single one of her skills, but in order to use 3 out of her 4 empowered skills, you are required to field very specific identities, which are all powerful 000 identities. This left players with an illusion of choice. Use less powerful identities with a nerfed Manager Dawn to experiment, or to invest mostly in a pre-built team that's much stronger than what we've seen before in the Bleed meta. This leads into my main problems with leaning into explicit design too much in the modern meta. It limits one of the main aspects of the game, that's team building. And by doing that, it also limits future synergy with other identities unless they exist within the same faction. Of course, it was discovered very early on that Manager Dawn's enhanced skills weren't integral to her kit, but a certain new identity that's releasing has this problem, and it's so much worse. Enter our current seasonal identity, which is releasing today. The Lord of Hongyuan, Honglu. Let us begin with an example. Counting the passive being mentioned multiple times, the word Heisho is mentioned 17 different times in his kit. And here's what he gains from explicitly playing with very specific team members. Maximum speed up, minimum speed up, defense level up, offense level up, damage up, attack power up, offense, defense, and damage up to all Heishos, damage conditionals, a skill 3 instead of skill 1 when they substitute in, and his main gimmick, which currently consists of 5 different buffs. I should not have to even explain why this is the most explicitly designed ID in the game thus far. Even with all that being said, I think he's going to be an incredibly fun ID in gameplay. I think Bolus Contamination, Exodia, and combo attacks are extremely hype, and I believe he's one of the best looking IDs out there. I simply have an issue with how his conditionals seem to be built on explicit team building choices rather than certain implicit ones. I'm doubly so disappointed, because there are parts of his kits that are affected by implicit conditionals, but they seem to be sidelined by very explicit forced team building choices. Now, here comes the fun part of the video. How does this affect you, the player? Well, if you're new to Limbus and you pull any explicitly designed IDs, you're either going to have to choose between having them be significantly nerfed, or you're going to have to obtain the entire team. If you're a Limbus veteran and you already have the full team for any future ID, that's great. Save your boxes for them whenever they come out, and enjoy them while they're meta. Do not, however, pull for these identities. This is a team building game at heart, and if you want that to remain its core, then let Project Moon know that with your habits as a player. Instead, I implore you to pull for potential IDs, or IDs that bring an entirely new team style into the game without forcing very specific team building aspects, such as death rights, tremor types, or anything else along those lines. Spend a bit of money pulling for these identities if you can. It'll let Project Moon know that fun team building is what we want out of the game. Of course, I won't force you to pull or not to pull, but at the very least, please keep an eye out for systems like this in the future. Project Moon seems to be overcorrecting in its decision to stray away from the Wild West of generalist IDs they had in the past, and it's my hope that we can find a healthy equilibrium. Before I end things off for you, a quick shout out to Weno, who uploaded a video very similar in concept to this one while I was scripting this. Make sure to watch that video and subscribe to Weno if you can. Thank you all for watching, and this is Generous Soldato, signing out.